Welcome to Behind the Debut, a podcast to shine a light on first-time authors and their journeys to publication. I'm your host, Michelle Reeves, a traditionally and self-published author myself, and in each episode we'll dive into the experiences of debut writers, how they got started, the challenges they faced, and what it really takes to bring a first book into the world. While most podcast airtime is reserved for best-selling authors, this is a space for new voices, authors who might not otherwise have the chance to share their story. In today's episode, I'm delighted to welcome Rocio Carranza, a multi-genre author who spent most of her youth with a book in her hand, consuming stories of fantasy and horror. She's now the author of dark fantasy novel Blood of the Blackthorn. Welcome to the show, Rocio. Can you start off by introducing yourself, tell us a bit about your first book, and also what inspired you to write it?
Hi, my name is Rocio Carranza, and I'm the author of Blood of the Blackthorn, my debut novel, which came out in March of this year. I actually used to write a lot of short stories back when, and even before then, I used to freelance edit. And it was around 2023, the summer, that I decided I would start submitting my short stories for consideration at magazines. And my first short story, Lana Lang, got accepted by Sad Girl Diaries literary magazine. And it kind of gave me the boost, I should say, in making me not feel like, oh, I'm such an imposter, the imposter syndrome. So ultimately, once I started doing that, I started submitting more works to magazines, a few more got accepted. And then I sat down one day as I was miserable at my corporate job and was like, you know what? I want to write a novel. I've always wanted to write a novel, but at that point in my life, I was like, I'm ready to write a novel. I know I can do it. And around January of 2024, I sat down and committed out of all my different works in progresses I had at the time. I committed to just one, and that was Blood of the Blackthorn. So ultimately, Blood of the Blackthorn is an adult fantasy novel, and I wanted my debut, to be a fantasy novel because I definitely connected with fantasy growing up, even from a young age, YA fantasy, etc. And as I got older, I still kept on reading it. It was kind of the love that never died. And so I felt like it would be such great full circle moment to just come back and be something that I started my author full-length novel journey on.
Thank you so much for sharing that intro, Rocio. I love how you started off with short stories and then you decided to commit to a novel, and that, that kind of determination you had to get your stories out there. It's so important. It's so much against us when we're, as writers, trying to write in the real world and get on with life and everything as well. It's something that's been coming up quite a lot recently with my subscribers on Substack, people kind of saying that, being able to actually sit down and do the writing is a tough thing. So really great to hear that you have that, determination to push through and get it done. And I love that you actually decided to write your debut in a genre that you loved and that, that you really enjoyed when you were reading. So I think, you have a real understanding for that genre then. And it's, as you said, it's a beautiful full circle moment. Tell us a bit about how you started out with the story. Did you plan it quite a lot, or did you kind of more, just see what happened as you were going along?
So for me, I would consider myself more of a plantser. And yeah, I said that intentionally because I tend to fly off the seat of my pants when I'm starting a new work in progress. And I will just write the scenes that come to me in my head, whether it's based off of a feeling or a song I heard or whatever it is. And I'll go based off of that, and then I'll imagine characters, and then I go more in depth and think about plot. Very loosely, of course. And then it's usually when I'm about 50% done with different scenes that I know can make up a full-length 90,000+ word novel then I decide, okay, let's put this all in order. Let's make an outline. Let's kind of get ourselves planned out a bit. So for me, I am definitely a plancer. Fly off the seat of my pants at first and then order it all together into a cohesive outline at the end. And then, of course, continue the story and make sure it all makes sense.
Wow, that sounds like a really fun way to go about writing the book, actually. Just, writing the scenes as they come to you, when you're inspired to do them, and then pulling it all together, when you get about halfway through. It's really interesting. I've never heard anyone do it quite that way before, so that's really, really interesting. It stresses me out a little bit because I'm definitely a planner, although I definitely did too much planning for my current work in progress because my brain thinks it's already done now that I'm actually sitting down to write the book. But but it's so interesting, isn't it, how all of us as authors approach writing novels in a slightly different way. And it just goes to show, you don't have to follow any one set of rules. There's no rules. Just write as it comes to you, write as feels right for you, and you never know, you might get a book at the end. So let's talk a bit about challenges then. What did you find was difficult? How did you overcome the challenges along the way?
I think for me, the biggest challenge was the fact that while I did freelance editing and I did write many, many short stories, at the end of the day, it is intentionally different or very much different than writing a novel of your own accord, a full-length novel. Because short stories, they're, for me at least, in my experience, when I'm writing them, it's very much a very easy beginning, middle, end. And you can do it in about 10 pages, maybe, 20, depending on how far you have that spaced out. And you can kind of get the story across very quickly, and you have to be very intentional with it. Versus a full-length novel for me was more methodical. I had to go ahead, plan or put all these scenes out that I wanted to do on my more pantser side, and then when I was planning out the outline, I was like, oh, okay, well, there's little plot holes here and whatnot. Whereas when I was writing short stories, it was very more cohesive because, again, it is a lot shorter. So I think the biggest challenge I initially faced during the writing process was the fact that I went from writing 10 to 20K words to up to 90 to 100,000. I think the way I overcame it the best was, one, continuously doing my more pantser side and writing out the scenes as they came to me, and then cohesively putting them together in an outline, because at the end of the day, I want to make sure that everything is seamless and it makes sense, but I also don't want to lose the evocative motion of the material that I'm trying to point across. I don't want it to read more regimented. I want my stories to feel more emotional or have that emotional impact on it at the end of the day.
Yes, I can totally see that. And there are always, I guess there's pros and cons, isn't there? There's the planning and it making it sometimes a bit too regimented, as you say, and then there's the kind of instinctual feeling we have as writers. And I guess we all just are better at some parts than others. I know some writers that are really good at the emotional side, and others that are really good at the descriptive side, and others that feel more comfortable with the sort of action and adventure side. So yeah, I guess we all have our strengths and our weaknesses, and that's what makes it fun, and that's why we're always learning, I guess. Was there any one particular scene or chapter or character that you found particularly challenging or rewarding to write?
So in Blood of the Blackthorn, the scene, or I should say the chapter that was very difficult to write was the King Eric's chapter. It was from his point of view because Blood of the Blackthorn is a multi-POV novel. There is one singular chapter of the villain of the story's point of view. And spoiler alert, in case anybody's listening, it does deal with the truth behind what happened with the Enchantress and his involvement in her demise. And so the reason it was difficult was because it very much goes into his point of view of how he justified, being essentially just a horrible human being to this woman who was ultimately innocent. And there were many times I had to leave that chapter and work on something a little more lighthearted and then come back to it, because I wanted to make sure that it wasn't traumatizing to the readers, but also that it got the point across without it being too essentially traumatizing, as I mentioned earlier. So I wanted to make sure I put a lot of care and thought into that specific chapter, because it does go over a lot of issues that I do mention between King Eric in this story and the Enchantress's demise ultimately. Now, if you're going to ask what was the most rewarding to write, I am a sucker for a ballroom scene. And so when I was writing Blood of the Blackthorn, I knew it in my head. One of the first scenes that ever came to me when I started writing was the ballroom scene. And so I had so much fun writing it, between Eve and her emotional turmoil and what's going on, and her kind of banter a little bit with Theo, kind of reminiscing, being a little wistful, all the way to Mark cutting in. It would just definitely gave me a lot of Anastasia vibes. It definitely gave me a lot of Princess Diaries. I feel like every millennial, has just that ballroom scene from random rom-coms that we've seen that just sticks with us. And so I knew for me, for sure, I had to write that scene. And it was very rewarding because as I mentioned, I'm a sucker for a ballroom scene.
Oh, wow. Both of those chapters sound amazing. I'm loving the Princess Diaries vibe and the ballroom scene. That sounds really cute. But I'm also liking the challenging chapter. It can be quite hard to go into the mind of another character. But I think that's actually a really fun part too, figuring out their motivations and why they've done what they've done. I've had to change stories by going through that process, because I realised that once I know those motivations, other things aren't going to pan out quite the way I thought. But that's what characters do. They change stuff. That's what they're allowed to do, I guess. How long did it take you to write the first draft based on, you having these challenges and overcoming them?
So, as I mentioned, I started writing Blood of the Blackthorn January of 2024. And the first draft took me 8 months. So all the way to about the end of August timeframe to completely finish. And then I revised from August all the way, I believe it was to September. Yeah, so about a month. I just spent revising, editing. And then I ultimately gave my manuscript to my editor, Heather Hudick from Simply Spellbound Edit. She is absolutely amazing. And no, she did not ask me to say that. But truly, the first draft, honestly, was the toughest, because as I mentioned earlier, I came from writing short stories, having to take on this bigger challenge of writing a full-length novel. So there was a lot of times where I was, having imposter syndrome. I was doubting myself. I wasn't sure if, I was doing a good job, essentially, because at the time, I was just building my network of, authors and writers and readers and being a part of the book community. So it was very new to me, and it did feel very overwhelming. Although I will say what did motivate me along the way was a lot of authors, as I did start, getting more integrated in the networking process, had great advice. And one of the best advice I'll never forget was essentially that the first draft is going to be a steaming pile of garbage. The whole point of your first draft is to get the thoughts that are in your head on the paper. Even if the dialogue doesn't sound right, even if the descriptions sound completely off and was written by a first grader, it doesn't matter. Get your thoughts on paper, and that is your first draft. Once you are done with your first draft, then from there, the magic happens in editing. So I think that really helped me stay motivated, because when I look at obviously the finished product now of Blood of the Blackthorn, and I look at that first draft, which is on a computer that I will never share with anybody, it was awful. And it was awful only that it was mainly just me getting these ideas down, trying to make sure the story kind of aligned, getting all these random scenes in random orders. And then when I edited, it was absolutely true. I did have to do a few rounds of self-editing revisions like anyone should. But that's when I really started to see like, oh, this story is really fleshing out. It's making sense. Like, oh, I can't believe that. Like, I thought of that witty way to write this. Okay, high five past me. So that's definitely the best advice I can always, pass on that other people have told me is first draft is the get it down draft. The editing is where the magic happens. And then obviously the final manuscript is, going to be the finished product due to that labor of love that you put in the first two, parts of the process.
Thank you for saying that, because, that imposter syndrome and overwhelm, it really does impact us as writers. And I don't think it just impacts new writers. I think it impacts writers that have been writing books for a long time and maybe even published lots of books. It's just one of those things that sometimes just won't let go of us particularly when we're starting those first drafts, the new ideas. It's like those gremlins come back in, at the beginning of the process. But really love that piece of advice you shared. Definitely something that I cling to as well, that first drafts don't have to be perfect, although I tend to revise as I go along rather than at the very end of a drafting process. I tend to do some revisions for each chapter as I'm going, and then do the editing process again. But I think that's just so smart to have that piece of advice in our back pockets. So thank you so much for sharing that. And you mentioned that you sent your manuscript to your editor. So can you talk a bit about the role that feedback played in shaping your manuscript, and a bit more about the editing and revision process?
So feedback, I had feedback from obviously my editor when I was first writing Blood of the Blackthorn. As I mentioned, initially I didn't have a big network, or I didn't have anything like that, and not many people do. So I was very shy about sharing my work with people. So the first draft I very much did by myself. However, when feedback started coming in was when I finished, I believe, my second round of self-edits and revisions. And then I started having random friends or my husband read parts of my novel. And it really kind of shaped my perspective, because I would mention something to like my girlfriends or anything, and they would be like, oh, well, that doesn't make sense. Or, oh, what about this? And it kind of helped, because I feel like when you're so into something, especially when it's very close and personal to your heart, like writing a book, you kind of have a little bit of blinders on, because you're so focused on what you know the words to mean and be. But when you get other perspectives, you're able to see like, oh, okay, the way I meant it wasn't the way it actually came across. Whether it's, oh, she forgot her blue shoe and then it ended up I wrote a red shoe somewhere else, or whatever it is. Eyes being different colors for different characters by accident, over 90,000 words, it starts getting a little like murky. So it's always good to have feedback, and I definitely love getting feedback. I will say my editor was definitely crucial in this as well, because she went through everything with a fine-tooth comb and she had questions. And I love having people give feedback who are critical, but in a professional and helpful sense, because I feel like that is very good for especially new authors as well, for big projects like this. Otherwise, I feel like many authors, or even when I'm, scrolling on Instagram and stuff or threads, I'll see some authors say that, oh, the editor said so and so about my book, and it'll be really awful, mean things, and it's just really discouraging. So I always recommend, for anybody, getting feedback from people will be honest with you, but that will also be critical because you want them to make sure that you come out with the best version of what you can do.
Yes, I'm totally with you on the constructive criticism. I had a brilliant editor for my second book in my series, and just knowing that someone was there, reading because they and enjoyed the process, but at the same time were able to look with a critical eye and just see the things that we don't see. You're right, you get really close to your manuscript, you get really close to the story and the characters, and you can't see the wood for the trees sometimes. And for me personally, thank goodness for Notion and allowing me to put together a word Bible with all those things that you mentioned, the wrong colour shoes. For me, it might be the wrong colour eyes, or I can't remember somebody's surname for a minor character, or what did I call the caretaker again at school? And, actually, what's the school called? And things like that. So really important to have, for me personally, to have that I can fall back on and do a search very easily through and find those kind of details. But you're right, having people in your corner that can help you do that too is so, so important. Can you tell us if there's anything surprising that you discovered as part of the writing process? I always like asking this question.
As far as surprising discoveries go, I think the surprising discovery is the fact that I committed to making this happen. I manifested it. It was the one thing in my life that I really was just like, I've always wanted to write a book. I always wanted to do this, but life gets in the way. And it wasn't until, again, 2023 where I really had a heart-to-heart moment with myself and was like, I am not happy with where I'm at right now in my corporate job. And this is no hate to the corporate girlies. You do you. It just wasn't for me. And I just had this calling to just want to write. I wanted to write so bad. And there would be many times where I'd be on break and I would just be writing random stories on my notes app or Google Docs or whatever. And it made me actually happy. And so the surprising discovery about myself when I was going through this author journey, when it came to my short stories and even Blood of the Blackthorn, was the fact that I found that the more creative I was being, the happier I was becoming, because it was something that I really wanted to do. Now, that's not to say there weren't hardships too, because I think that was another surprising thing, was even when you're doing something you love, it doesn't mean that everything is just hunky-dory and there's zero problems. In fact, it means that even when there's problems, that you're able to kind of reconcile and say, this is still something I want to do. It's still something that makes me happy. And it's still something that is worth the darker days. And that was just something that surprised me about myself, because not that I'm one to quit, but I felt that like imposter syndrome and all this other stuff would be so overwhelming, and I would have so much doubt about myself and my craft. But I felt that once I found the right people who, encouraged me, encouraged my art, and then I encouraged myself, that it just kind of flowed together, and it just kind of made things a lot easier. So yeah, surprising discovery would be that.
That's an awesome discovery and such a cool thing to learn about yourself. And, I'm guessing that's had implications for the rest of your life as well. So you know what makes you happy, and you know what you have to build into your routine and into your life. It's a real blessing to have that kind of insight. How have you approached promoting Blood of the Blackthorn? Do you like marketing?
I feel like when it comes to promoting or marketing books, that is the bane of every author's existence. Except a few. Hey, there are some who are absolutely great and actually like it. But the majority I've talked to, I think marketing is our bane of our existence, because we are, very much wanting to be artistic and spend all our time doing whatever it is our art is. And for me personally, when it comes to promoting, I definitely try to come at it from a more like fun and also artistic angle a little bit, in the sense that I'll put character art up, or I'll talk about how excited I am about what, is coming out, whether it's new character art, my book, etc., or, even other, guest writing features, etc. And while I am more of a fan of writing my book, I cannot say that I hated marketing my book, because I felt like that is where I found a lot of readers. Because again, if someone can create this spectacular piece of art, but if nobody knows about it, then it just stays as a spectacular secret. And marketing is very important for that. So I think that's how I kind of reconciled with myself, because I can be very introverted at times. So when I put myself out there, it makes me nervous. But when it's a friend or, another fellow peer or writer, I'm over here like, oh, read their book. I loved it because I did, etc. So I think I'm still coming to terms with, promoting and marketing.
I think we're all coming to terms with the marketing process that tags onto the back of the publishing process, whether we like it or not. You're so right. It's how we find readers for our stories. And, well, I think there is merit in being a hobby writer and writing just for the pleasure of writing, and maybe, never even sharing your stories. That when you do get your stories out there into the world and readers read them and they share how those stories make them feel, it's a beautiful thing. And I really enjoyed your mindset there for how you make marketing and promotion a bit more fun. I think that's a really good mindset to have. Tell us a little bit about your writing routine. Do you have any favorite tools or resources that you always use?
My writing routine would probably be I spend most of my morning working out, exercising, and, taking care of my cat, spending a little time with them. And then I'll usually spend about 4 to 5 hours just straight writing my book. And I know everybody has something different. I know many authors who love burning the midnight oil and writing at the night. I get grumpy, actually, if I don't have a lot of sleep. So I definitely try to do my writing during the morning and midday, because I feel like once the evening starts to take over, I start getting a little tired, and then I start noticing that I'm writing random words multiple times, or I mix up the color of characters' eyes or whatever it is. So that is what I would say as far as writing routine on a day-to-day basis goes. When it comes to tools and resources, I am a personal fan of using Google Docs. I do know a lot of people who love Scrivener. I haven't personally used it as much, but I definitely like going and just freestyling on my Google Docs or even my Notes app sometimes, and just kind of putting whatever thoughts are come to my head. I could be grocery shopping, and then I'll think of a scene in my head. I'm like, I have to write this right now, and kind of have a little chaos magic over there, and then put it all together whenever I get home onto a single document. I'm very much a bit chaotic when it comes to that. I blame the neurodivergence in me, but it's definitely more, okay, whenever an idea comes to me, write it on the Notes app, write it on Google Docs, and don't forget about it. If I get really desperate, I actually do have like a notebook and a pen in my car. So if something were to happen, I can write stuff down. So that would probably be my favorite tools and resources would be that.
Hey, there is nothing wrong with a notebook and pen in the car. I absolutely rely on my notebooks, and I leave myself voice messages. I send myself WhatsApp messages. I don't think there's any shame in how we get the information down, as long as we get it down. So I really love that you have that kind of approach. It just goes to show that you do not have to have a ton of fancy tools in order to get a book written, which is a really great message for anyone listening. Just get the words down however you get them down and then cobble them together later on. And just big shout out to my favourite tool, which is Atticus, for that whole process of formatting your book, getting it together and then outputting it as an ebook and as a paperback as well, and then uploading it wherever you need to. Atticus is the bomb. But yes, when you're writing, you really don't need to have anything special. So good for you for keeping it simple. You shared some great advice today for us, but if there was a piece of advice you could go back and give your pre-published self, what would it be?
I would honestly say to not doubt yourself, that you got this. There is no rush. Take the time you need. And, comparison is the thief of joy. Because I think especially very initially, I felt that I wasn't on par with a lot of my peers. And it wasn't until, I started getting my own footing and started, becoming more confident in what I was doing that I felt a lot better about it. But initially it definitely was, a feeling of, oh, what if I am not good enough? What if I do not belong in this space? And I feel like when you're putting your art out there, whether you are an illustrator, a writer, whatever it is you do, you're essentially putting a vulnerable piece of your soul out on display for other people to critique and make remarks about. So I think that's something I would give as far as advice goes is, don't worry about all the chatter on the outside. Focus on your craft. Get critique from people who have your best interests at heart, but are also willing to give you beneficial critique as well. I realize that is a lot more than just one piece of advice. So I guess in summation, I would probably say that the single piece of advice I would give to my past self is that you are worthy. You don't have to worry about imposter syndrome. Everybody goes through moments of doubt, and there's always a seat at the table. Bring a chair if you have to, but you are worthy of being part of the author space as well.
Wow, I'm keeping all of that in because that is a powerhouse of advice there. And, anyone listening to this, please just hit rewind and listen to that again, because so many great tips there about overwhelm and imposter syndrome and all those things that hit us. And yes, 100% to pulling up your own chair to the table, because, everyone has got a place. There's lots and lots of room for writers of every kind and every genre. There will be an audience out there for you. So I completely love that. Thank you for that brilliant advice. Tell us a bit about what's next for you as an author. What are you working on right now that you are excited about?
As far as what's next, I'm working on book 2 of the Eternal Curse series, which is the same series that Blood of the Blackthorn is a part of. I am working on a horror short story collection, which I hopefully plan to put out later this year. And I am working on a romance novel as well, which I hope to put out around Christmas time, or at least by January, February of next year. Ultimately, for those who may not know, I am a multi-genre author. When I did short stories, I did some romance, some literary fiction, some magical realism. My debut novel is fantasy. So I definitely love keeping on my toes and trying out new things every now and then, because I just feel like it keeps the creative juices flowing, and it's just my favorite thing to do, I guess.
Wow, you have got a lot going on at the moment, Rocio. I'm excited about the second book and short stories and a romance novel. You definitely are living up to your multi-genre name. Very exciting that you have so many irons in the fire. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It's been so fun hearing about all your projects. Where can people find you and your books?
Now, my books can be found on bookshop.org, Barnes & Noble, my website, rociocarranza.com. if you wanted signed copies, Amazon, and Kindle Unlimited. And lastly, you can find me on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at Rocio Carranza Writes. And I'm also on Blue Sky at Rocio Carranza.
Oh, that's awesome. I will make sure that all of those links are in the show notes so that you can easily connect with Rocio in all those amazing places where you'll find her. And this has been so fun. Thanks so much again for being on the show today.
Thank you so much, Behind the Debut, for having me. I loved answering all of your questions. For anybody listening, have a great day and keep on reading.
That's it for this episode of Behind the Debut. Thank you to Rocio for sharing her journey with us. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing it with a fellow book lover. It really helps new authors get discovered. You can find out more about today's guest, including where to buy their book, in the show notes. And if you're a debut author yourself and would love to be featured, email me at michelle@michellereeveswrites.com for more details. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep writing, keep dreaming, and keep turning the page on your own story.